here's the thing. I have read 50 books so far in 2020. Books to me have been an escape. They've been a place for me to go when I need, especially right now, in this current climate. And this year has most definitely been my best reading year of my entire 22 years on this planet. And I wanted to break it down and share that with you. So get ready, because we're about to go through the stats for the 50 books that I have read so far in 2020. Hello everyone, my name is Jenna, but you guys can call me Jen. Welcome back to my channel. So yes, folks, we are here. We are here to talk about the 50 books I have read so far in 2020. I am not going to go through all 50 books by title because we would be here for an hour, because we know how I talk about books, and even if I just rattled off their titles to you, we would be here forever. So that's not this kind of video. This video is going to be a stats oriented video, and then I'm going to later on talk about my favorites of each month, my disappointments of each month, and my least favorites of each month, because sometimes those are different. So without further ado, let's just get into this. So basically for this video, I've decided to break it down into monthly, so how many books I've read every month. The ratings, so we have 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars, 3.5 stars, 4 stars, 4.5 stars, and 5 stars, and unrated as well. And then I'm going to talk about the genres that I have read and that kind of breakdown. And of course, if you guys remember, one of my first videos of 2020 was the breakdown of how many unread books I have on my shelves, on my physical TBR. And I had, at the beginning of this year, 183 unread books on my physical TBR, not counting my classics books. Because if it counted my classics books, it would be well over 200. I'm thinking closer to 250 because I just collect classics and I don't really read all of them. But that's why I don't include those on my unread TBR list, because those are more of a treat for me to read. But anyways, so 183 starting this year off. And so I also want to go into that and see if I've shrunk that number at all through my hauling and reading practices as well. And then after all of that, I will talk about my favorites and all that jazziness. So let's just go into this. So January, the first month of the year, I ended up reading 12 books. An incredible start to the year. Absolutely incredible. I'm so happy that it was that good of a start. Then in February, I read 14 books. So not only did I read an incredible amount of books in January, but I upped it in the shortest month of the year by 2 books in February, which is insane. I don't even know how I did that. And then in March I read 11 books, and then April I read 12. And so far in May I have read 1 because it's May 7th and I have not really been in the mood to read recently. Now for my ratings, this has been one of my best reading years for ratings wise as well. I have very few books under a 3 star. So I have no 1 stars. At all. None at all. Usually I save my 1 stars for like the absolutely abysmal, awful books, and I don't usually read those kind of books. If I come across it, I will DNF it. Oh, I didn't even think about DNFs. Have I DNF'd anything this year? No, I don't think I've DNF'd anything. If I have, I don't remember, and honestly, if I DNF a book, it's because I'm just not interested, and they're not really memorable, so why remember them anyways? So besides that, okay, and then 2 stars, I have 2 books, and both of those books were book club books that I read with my friends in my personal life. They were books that I had to read. They were books that I would have DNF'd if I was reading them on my own. and I don't really enjoy talking about them very much because they're just not good. And then I have my 3-star books, so the middle of the roads, not very exciting, kind of disappointing books to me, and I have 3 of those. So again, not too bad of a year. Then we get into the more higher end ratings. So we have the 3.5 star. I have 5 books in that one. So far, only 5 books have landed in the 3.5 star range. Usually I keep my 3.5 star range for the books that are like good, but gently disappointing, or just like kind of books, but I can see the merits in them. For example, Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab. That is one of them. 4 stars, I've read 8 books, which is really, really good because that means the rest of my books are in a 4.5 star or a 5 star. And you guys, I have read 13 4.5 star books and 18 5-star books so far this year. I have read more 5-star books this year than any other kind of book, which makes me so happy because that means I'm loving the reads that I'm reading, and I'm finding books that I consider to be real favorites of mine. And I've been trying to be a little bit more careful with my ratings as I go through them. These genres that I've read so far this year. When I first brought out my bullet journal, because I've been using my bullet journal for all my stats, because I keep track of all the books I read, the kind of books I read, the books on my physical TBR that I've read, that kind of vibe. So the genres that I have are, that I've broken it down into YA fantasy, fantasy, sci-fi, romance, middle grade, mystery, general fiction, classics, and YA contemporary. Because I've broken it down into YA in a few places because I know, space-wise, in my bullet journal, don't have enough space if I did just fantasy, because the majority of my reading is in fantasy, both YA and adult. So I was like, well, I should probably break those two apart because they are different enough, I think, because you have the YA fantasy that often is romance-centered, is more accessible to readers, has a little bit easier world building and a little bit less just kind of dunk you into this massive world and you have to learn the terms as you go, that high fantasy has and adult fantasy has. So I decided to split that up, as well as YA contemporary, because I think that's quite different than your fiction or your romance, because often you can have a fiction book that you think is romance, but it's not. And then you'll have your romance book that you think is YA, but it's not. You know, like, you'll have those 3 pretty distinct places. Anyways, you know this. You are watching BookTube. So let's just talk about how many books I've read in each of these categories, because otherwise we're gonna be here all day. We don't have time for this. So in YA fantasy, I have read 11 books so far this year. In adult fantasy or high fantasy, I've read 15 books. Now those are my 2 highest read genres, and they will be by the end of this year too, because I adore fantasy with all my heart. It is my favorite genre. It will always be my favorite genre, and just is incredible. Anyways, the next one down I have sci-fi, because I wanted also to put sci-fi in my genres because I wanted to read more sci-fi. And that hasn't happened yet this year. I've only read 1 book in the sci-fi genre and I hated it, so that's fun. Then romance, I've read so far 4 books, which I also want to up that number. I'm just not, usually that'll happen in the summer because I tend to gravitate to the lighter books in the summer, the easier reads, you know. And then I've read 6 middle grade books so far this year. That is including my Harry Potter rereads. I've read 2 mystery books this year. One of them was just in April, and the one previous, I believe, was in January, and I think that's when I read Lethal White. Fiction, so like general fiction, is usually where I throw the books that I don't really know what genre they're in. Like, they're not really romance, they're not really like YA, so I'm just like, well, general fiction, I'm gonna throw it there. And I've read 5 of those. I have read 4 classics this year, so I have kept up with my wanting to read a classic a month, sort of. There's been 4 months so far, and I've read 4 classics, but I haven't read a classic a month, you know, like, but I'm really trying to. And I've read one YA contemporary. YA contemporary. I don't even know why it's on this list. I think I probably just put it on this list because I read Tweet Cute with my lovely ladies book club here on the internet, because that is YA, and I didn't really just want to put that one in romance because it doesn't really fit, in my opinion. So yes, that is a breakdown of all of the books I have read so far this year. As I said at the beginning of this video, I started with 183 physical books on my TBR. Now, that is a huge number. I am terrified of that number. 183 unread books at the beginning of this year. I have also hauled 16 books so far in 2020. 16. I've kept track because I'm being very careful about it. Out of those 16, I have read 8 of them. So, that's great. And then I went and I counted how many books, because I have this lovely spread in my bullet journal, as I showed you earlier, of the shelves of my books that says, reading my physical TBR in 2020. I have also written on here the 3 on here because one of the classics that I've read was a reread for me. It was Pride and Prejudice. So I didn't draw that in my reading my physical TBR. But these 2 shelves on this top corner here, these 2, are the ones that I'm not counting towards this number because I didn't count my classics towards that number of 183. So those aren't included. But all of the other ones that I have read 31 books off of my physical TBR this year so far. So that brings my total down to 160 books on my physical TBR. I am so happy that I'm actually shrinking that number. Editing Jenna popping in here. I have been sitting here for a hot second thinking about this math that I've done, and it's wrong because when I put in the 183 books, which I started with, which was correct, and then I added only 8 books, the 8 unread books, I counted all of the unread books that I've read on my bullet journal spread, which is 31. I made the mistake because I had already removed 8 books of those hauled books. So in reality, I have 168 books on my unread TBR. Still a great number, but 8 books more than I said in this video. So yes, we have 183 at the start of this year. I have hauled 16 books and I've read 31 books. So that brings it down to 168. My math is flawed. I didn't realize it was flawed until now. So there you go. I would love to shrink that number to 130 by the end of this year. So that is reading another 30 books off my physical TBR that I own already. Now, let's start talking about my books that I've read each month, like my favorites, my disappointments, and all that, because I wanted to include this so that it's a little bit less number oriented and more just a general talking about what I've loved so far this year, what I've hated, what I've found really disappointing. So January, that's the month that I read 12 books in. So that month I came across one of my new all-time favorite books, and I don't own it physically. I listened to it on audio, and it was The Light Between Worlds by Laura E. Weymouth. And this book was just heartbreaking and beautifully written, and I just adored every second of it. And when I'm able to find a really beautiful copy of it, I want to add it to my collection. Honorary mentions for this month also are Mistborn, because I read the first Mistborn in January, and Race to the Sands by Sarah Beth Durst, because that was my first read of 2020 and it was so good, and it's a fantasy standalone. The least favorite of January was My Uncle Oswald, which was a book club pick with my friends, so I won't talk about that. That's my Roald Dahl. And the disappointment of the month was Queen of the Tearling, because I expected a lot more from it and it was really just forgettable and boring, which is so sad because I thought it was going to be like a great epic fantasy, but it was not. Anyways, in February I read 14 books and I came across yet another all-time favorite book, if not my favorite book of this year. Possibly of all time, I'll put it out there, but we're gonna say The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I adore this book, and I have been talking about it on my channel since I've read it, so I'm not going to say anything more. Honorary mentions for this month as well are Persuasion by Jane Austen, was one of the Jane Austens that I hadn't read yet, and The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson was so epic and so good. The Guinevere Deception was also a huge surprise for me, and The Lies of Locke Lamora. Two of those books actually were featured in my Reading Booktube's favorites, Reading Regan's favorites from Proust Project, so one of my favorite videos that I've done so far this year as well. My least favorite and my disappointment, because this one I was looking so forward to and it ruined me and I hated it, was In 5 Years. I don't remember who wrote it, but it's that, like, it was pitched as a romance book and it was all around the internet for a long time. It was heartbreaking and I hated it. Not because of the story, but because of the way it was written, and I'm really sorry if you can hear snorting, because my dog is rubbing her face on the carpet right now because she's decided right now is a great time to do that. In 5 Years was a definite disappointment. Did not like the way it ended, did not like the way it was written. Just not, no. And then another disappointment of mine was Keeper of the Lost Cities, never seen, just because it felt like a bridge book and it was my least favorite of the Keeper of the Lost Cities books. But it was still okay. Like, it wasn't my least favorite book. It was just a disappointment to me. February was my best reading month so far, numbers-wise and ratings-wise. It was so good. March, again, incredible reading month, because nothing I read was under a 4-star. So there's not really any disappointments or least favorites. The least favorite I would say would be Thunderhead, because simply it's just a series that I'm not enjoying as much as everybody else, but I can see the merits in it. But yes, so I think Thunderhead is my least favorite from March, simply because I'm just not enjoying the series as much as everybody else. Like, I am enjoying it, it's just not my favorite. Okay, so my favorite from this month is The Kingdom of Back by Marie Lu. Another book that I've talked about endlessly on my channel. It's so, so good, and you all need to read it. Oh, honorary mentions for this month basically could be all of the books that I read, because they were all pretty good, but I will say The Merciful Crow was a surprise 5-star for me. The Six of Crows duology was just incredible. And of course, Chain of Gold, because I read that month as well. And April, finally, we reached the last month, basically, other than May. April, I read, I don't know how many books, I don't remember, 12, another great reading month. My favorite of this month was Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin, and the honorary mention is The Beast of Beswick, because I have a newfound love for historical romance and I would love to keep finding them and reading them. But this month was also my least, like, not least, it was just not as good as the other reading months ratings wise. I didn't have many 5 stars. The only 5 stars that I had were rereads or the George R.R. Martin book. And then I have my unrated book, which is Middle Game. I'm still unsure about this one. It could be a 5-star, it could be a 4-star. I just don't know how to rate this one at all, you guys. So it's just gonna remain as unrated for now until I just come to a decision about it. But there's that one. And this book I also, this past month, the disappointments for me were 8 Perfect Murders and A Gathering of Shadows, simply because they were just to me, and I hate books. I liked Gathering Shadows more than 8 Perfect Murders for sure, but still just so disappointed in both of those. And I think the least favorite would be, oh, without a doubt, The Keeper of the Isis Light, which I had to read for book club with my friends. It was just not good. I hated it. But other than that would be probably the 8 Perfect Murders, simply because it just wasn't my cup of tea. Not my favorite thing in the world. But yes, so that brings us to May, and today, as of May 7th, I have 160 books on my physical TBR. I have read 50 books. My 50th book was The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, which I read for book club with my friends, and it was a 5-star. I think I've covered everything. If you guys want to know more information about the books that I've read, I will link all of my wrap-ups that cover them in detail. They list all the books that I've read by name, talk about them, give my ratings and all that. I will list all my wrap-ups in the drop-down box below, the description box below, and I wish you all a great, great Friday, because I'm putting this up on a Friday, and if you're watching it on a Friday, hey, and if you're not watching it on a Friday, I wish you a great day, no matter what day it is. no matter what time of day it is. And so, do all that lovely stuff that YouTube tells you to do. Subscribe, like, comment, all that jazziness, and I will see you in another video soon. Stay kind and keep on reading.